welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. From the audio journal of Dr. Elias Mercer, acoustical engineer. Recording number 1, October 7th. I should begin by saying I don't typically keep audio journals. Written notes have always been my preference. Clean, precise, measurable. But there's something about the sounds in this town that demands to be recorded rather than described. Perhaps listening back will reveal patterns my ears missed in the moment. The harbor fog has barely lifted since my arrival in Seabrook 3 days ago. It clings to the Victorian rooftops and wraps the church spires in gauzy shrouds, making them appear to float above the town like watchful sentinels. There are 7 churches here, which seems excessive for a population of barely 3,000. But that's why I'm here. Seabrook's unusual concentration of historic bell towers makes it perfect for my research on pre-industrial acoustic engineering. The university grant only covers 2 weeks, but that should be sufficient. Document the acoustic signatures of each bell, analyze their harmonic patterns, and determine how coastal erosion and salt air might have altered their tones over centuries. Simple, or it would be if the bells were still in service. According to town records, the last of them ceased regular operation in 1998. Cost-cutting measures, I was told. Electronic chimes were cheaper than maintaining the massive bronze originals. Some towers still have their bells physically intact, just disconnected from their ringing mechanisms, which makes what happened last night all the more puzzling. I'd set up my recording equipment in my room at the Harborview Inn, directly across from St. Augustine's, the oldest church in town, established 1753 according to the weather-beaten sign out front. I chose the room specifically for its unobstructed view of the bell tower. At midnight, I was reviewing spectrographic analyses when it happened. A single, perfect toll. I nearly knocked over my laptop rushing to the window. St. Augustine's bell tower was dark, as it had been all evening. No lights, no movement. Just that lingering fog, now tinged slightly blue in the moonlight. But the sound, there was no mistaking it. A deep, resonant D-flat that hung in the air several seconds longer than acoustically possible. I checked my equipment immediately. The sound spike was clearly visible on the recording, an almost perfect sine wave at first, then rippling with overtones that, I need to be scientific here. The overtones didn't behave according to standard acoustic principles. They seemed to fold back on themselves, creating interference patterns that shouldn't be possible from a single source. This morning, I spoke with Mrs. Kendrick at the front desk, a spry woman in her 70s who's apparently lived in Seabrook her entire life. When I mentioned the bell, her hand went still on the coffee pot she was pouring. "You must have dreamed it, Dr. Mercer," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "Those bells haven't rung in decades. Can't ring. The mechanisms were all removed." "I have a recording," I told her. Something flickered across her face. Fear? Concern? Before she smiled tightly. "Electronic interference, I'd guess. These old buildings play havoc with equipment. Had a ghost hunting team through here last year. All their gadgets went haywire." I didn't press the issue, but her reaction was curious enough that I decided to visit St. Augustine's in person. The caretaker, a stooped man named Harlan with permanently soil-stained hands, was tending to the cemetery that encircles the church. When I introduced myself and explained my research, he was initially welcoming, showing me the exterior architecture with evident pride. "These walls have stood against 300 years of nor'easters," he said, patting the weathered stone. "They know how to keep their secrets." An odd turn of phrase. When I asked about accessing the bell tower, his manner changed. "Tower's been sealed," he said flatly. "Structural concerns." Nobody goes up there now. I explained about the grant, the university backing, even offered to sign liability waivers, but he remained unmoved. Only when I mentioned hearing the bell toll did his expression change. A momentary widening of the eyes, quickly masked. "You're mistaken," he said, already turning away to resume his work. "Like I said, nobody goes up there. Not for years." I lingered in the churchyard after he retreated inside, making environmental recordings and taking photographs of the tower's exterior. The stone had an unusual quality, almost iridescent in certain light, with veins of some mineral I couldn't identify running through it. As I was packing up my equipment, a woman approached from the street. Early 30s, I'd guess, East Asian features, carrying a leather portfolio that looked antique. "You're the sound researcher," she said. Not a question. "Dr. Elias Mercer," I confirmed, extending my hand. "And you are Maya Chen. I curate the local historical society archives." Her handshake was brief but firm. "Mrs. Kendrick mentioned you were asking about the bells." Something in her tone suggested caution. "Yes, I'm documenting their acoustic properties for my research, even though they don't ring anymore." A slight smile played at her lips. I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I heard St. Augustine's bell last night. Recorded it, in fact." Instead of dismissing my claim as the others had, she glanced up at the tower, her expression unreadable. "I'd be interested in hearing that recording, Dr. Mercer." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a notification. Probably my department head checking on my progress. But when I looked at the screen, it wasn't an email or text. It was an emergency alert. "Coastal weather advisory. Unusual atmospheric conditions reported. Citizens advised to remain indoors between sunset and sunrise until further notice." "Strange," I murmured. "The forecast was clear when I checked this morning." Maya leaned over to see my screen, then pulled out her own phone. No alert displayed on hers. "Must be targeted to certain areas," I suggested. "Or certain people," she replied, that same slight smile returning. She handed me a card from her portfolio. "Come by the archives tomorrow. I have materials about the bells that might interest you. Historical records the university databases won't have." She left before I could ask more questions, her slender figure quickly disappearing into the persistent fog that had begun rolling in from the harbor again. I made one more recording of the ambient sound around the church, noting an unusual low-frequency hum at the edge of audibility, before returning to the inn. "It's nearly sunset now. Following the advisory seems prudent, though I can't help but wonder about its specificity. The fog has thickened considerably, limiting visibility to barely 20 feet. From my window, I can just make out St. Augustine's spire, a darker shadow against the grainy twilight. I've set up my equipment again, calibrated for optimal night recording. If that bell rings again, I want to capture every harmonic nuance. There's something else I should mention. When I was reviewing last night's recording more carefully this afternoon, I noticed something in the spectrographic analysis. Buried within the overtones of the bell's toll was what appears to be a voice, too distorted to make out words, but unmistakably human in its cadence. I've applied several filters trying to isolate it with limited success. But one segment cleared enough to distinguish what sounds like two words, repeated, "Coming through, coming through." The harbor foghorn just sounded. Night has fallen completely, and the bell tower has vanished into darkness. I'll continue this journal tomorrow, after I've visited the historical archives. For now, I'm going to sit by the window and listen. From the audio journal of Dr. Elias Mercer, acoustical engineer. Recording number 2, October 8th. The bell didn't ring last night. I stayed awake until nearly 3, equipment running. But there was nothing except the occasional foghorn and the distant hiss of waves on the shore. I must have fallen asleep in the chair by the window because I woke at dawn with a stiff neck and the lingering fragments of unsettling dreams. Something about deep water and distant voices calling my name. After breakfast, I made my way to the Historical Society as Maya had suggested. The building itself is worth noting. a former lighthouse keeper's residence perched on the bluff overlooking the harbor. The ground floor has been converted into a small museum showcasing Seabrook's maritime past. Fishing equipment, whaling harpoons, faded photographs of stern-faced captains. A glass case displays what appears to be fragments of shipwreck debris, oddly pitted and corroded in patterns that don't match typical saltwater damage. Maya was waiting in the research room upstairs, surrounded by stacks of leather-bound volumes and archival boxes. Large windows faced the ocean, casting rippling light patterns across the wooden floor as clouds passed overhead. 6 different church spires were visible from this vantage point, rising above the town's rooftops like needles. "You look tired, Dr. Mercer," she said by way of greeting. "Trouble sleeping? Professional hazard," I replied. "I was monitoring for more acoustical anomalies." She nodded as if this made perfect sense. "And did you hear anything?" "Nothing from the bells, but I've been analyzing that recording from the night before." I set up my laptop to show her the spectrographic analysis. "There's something embedded in the sound that shouldn't be there." Maya leaned closer as I played the enhanced audio. The bell's toll resonated through the small room, and then, more clearly than before, coming through. Her face paled slightly. "You've done quite a bit of processing on this." "Basic filtering techniques," I explained. The voice was already there. I just isolated it from the bell's overtones. She was silent for a moment, then moved to one of the archival boxes. "I pulled these for you. Church records dating back to the 1750s, focusing on the bells." The documents she showed me were fascinating from a historical perspective. Detailed logs of bell maintenance, casting specifications, even sound descriptions written by various church officials over centuries. But one journal in particular caught my attention: the personal diary of Reverend Matthias Sullivan, who oversaw St. Augustine's from 1878 to 1893. Sullivan's entries began conventionally enough, discussing parish matters and theological musings. But his later writings grew increasingly disturbed, focusing obsessively on the church bell. He described its sound as piercing the veil and wrote about visitors who could only be perceived when the bell was ringing. One passage stood out: April 17, 1892. "They continue to speak through the resonance." I have transcribed their words as best I can, though the meaning remains obscure. They speak of coming through, of a doorway opened by the precise frequency of our bell. I fear we have unknowingly created a beacon that calls to something best left undisturbed. The bell must be silenced. "There's a gap after this," Maya explained, turning several blank pages. "Sullivan disappeared for 3 months, then was found wandering the beaches, apparently suffering from severe mental deterioration. His final entry is this." The last page contained a single sentence, written in shaky, barely legible script. "They have learned our frequencies. They are learning our forms." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "What happened to him?" "Committed to an asylum in Boston. Died 6 months later." Maya closed the journal carefully. "There's more. Similar incidents every 40 years or so. Bell ringers reporting voices experiencing breakdowns. The last cycle would have been in the 1990s, when they stopped using the bells," I noted. She nodded. "Officially, it was budget cuts. Unofficially," she shrugged. I was about to ask more when my phone vibrated. Another emergency alert. "Seabrook emergency notification. Acoustic anomalies detected in vicinity of historical structures. Citizens advised to avoid church bell audio and report unusual sounds to local authorities." This time, Maya's phone buzzed as well. She glanced at it, frowning. "That's new. Usually they're more subtle." "They? Who's issuing these alerts?" Instead of answering, she moved to the window, gazing out at the harbor. A Coast Guard vessel had appeared, unusual for this quiet stretch of coastline. "How long are you planning to stay in Seabrook, Dr. Mercer?" she asked, still watching the boat. "My grant covers 2 weeks." "Why? You might want to consider cutting it short. Because of some old stories and strange sounds?" I tried to sound dismissive, but the correlation between Sullivan's writings and my own recording was too precise to ignore. Maya turned from the window. Because things happen in cycles here, and you've arrived at the beginning of one. I spent my life studying this town's patterns. The bells are waking up again. They're inanimate objects, I pointed out. Bronze and iron can't wake up. Maybe it's not the bells themselves, she said quietly. Maybe it's what they connect to. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a man in a Coast Guard uniform. Late 40s, weathered face, the authoritative bearing of someone accustomed to command. Ms. Chan, he nodded to Maya, then turned to me. You must be Dr. Mercer. I'm Captain Leonard Walsh. Mind if I join you? Maya's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Captain Walsh oversees maritime safety for this stretch of coastline. Among other things, Walsh added with a thin smile, your university department chair speaks highly of your acoustic expertise, Doctor. That's actually why I wanted to meet you. His casual mention of my department chair was clearly meant to establish that he'd been checking up on me. I kept my tone neutral. How can I help the Coast Guard? We're installing some new underwater acoustic monitoring equipment in the harbor. There have been reports of unusual sound patterns affecting marine life and navigation systems. Given your specialized knowledge, your input would be valuable. It was a reasonable request on the surface, but something felt off about it. I'd be happy to consult. My expertise is in architectural acoustics, though not marine environments. Sound is sound, isn't it? Water just changes how it travels. Walsh's smile didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps you could share your current findings. Any recordings or analysis you've compiled since arriving? The request wasn't subtle. Before I could respond, Maya interjected smoothly. Dr. Mercer was just telling me he needs to process more data before drawing conclusions. Isn't that right? I nodded, grateful for the intervention. Exactly. Preliminary findings wouldn't be scientifically sound. Walsh seemed about to press further when all three of our phones emitted the same shrill tone simultaneously. Another alert. Test of emergency broadcast system. Disregard previous notifications. No action required. Regular testing of alert system in progress. Well, that's a relief, Walsh said with exaggerated lightness. System's been glitchy lately, sending out automated alerts without authorization. He closed the alert on his phone, then handed me a business card. When you're ready to share your findings, or if you hear anything unusual, call me directly. Day or night. After he left, Maya and I stood in silence for a moment. The sunlight had disappeared, clouds darkening over the harbor. He's lying about the alerts, I said finally. Yes. She began returning the archival materials to their boxes. The question is why? What aren't you telling me, Maya? She paused, considering. My grandmother was the church organist at St. Augustine's for 40 years. She was there in '93, the last time the bells rang on their own. Her voice lowered. She described it as something tuning in, like a radio finding its frequency. She was never the same afterward. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and I realized the weather had changed dramatically while we were talking. Dense fog was rolling in from the ocean again, enveloping the church spires one by one. Tonight, Maya said, her eyes on the vanishing horizon, check if your phone will record in sleep mode. And Dr. Mercer, her gaze shifted to me, intense and worried. Whatever happens, don't answer if something calls your name. I left the Historical Society with more questions than answers, Sullivan's journal entries echoing in my mind. As I write this, evening is approaching, and the fog has become so thick I can barely see across the street. St. Augustine's is just a shadow in the whiteness. My equipment is set up, all frequencies monitored, and this time, I've added an infrared camera pointed at the bell tower. Something tells me I won't sleep through the night again. From the audio journal of Dr. Elias Mercer, acoustical engineer. Recording number 3, October 9th. I need to document this while it's still fresh. I've replayed the night's recordings a dozen times, and each review reveals new anomalies that defy acoustic principles. Sleep seems impossible now. At precisely midnight, St. Augustine's bell tolled again. Not a single ring like before, but a sequence. 3 distinct tolls with 5-second intervals between them. The sound registered perfectly on my equipment, the harmonics even more complex than in the previous recording. But what truly unsettles me is what the infrared camera captured. The bell tower remained dark to the naked eye, but in infrared, there was movement. Not human movement, nothing so concrete. It appeared as ripples in the air, like heat distortion but more patterned, almost geometric. These disturbances intensified with each toll, expanding outward from the tower in concentric rings that dissipated about 20 meters from the source. More disturbing still was the voice component embedded in the bell's resonance. I've enhanced it as much as possible, coming through. Almost. Need more. Need all. The voice, if it can be called that, seems to be evolving, gaining coherence. I've analyzed its acoustic structure, and it doesn't match human vocal patterns. The formants and overtones are wrong, as if something is approximating human speech without understanding the physiological mechanisms that produce it. I contacted Maya immediately this morning. Her reaction confirmed my growing suspicion that she knows far more than she's revealed. 3 tolls, she said quietly when I played her the recording over the phone. It's happening faster this time. Faster than what? What exactly is it? Maya, a long pause. Meet me at Trinity Church on Harbor Street at noon. Not St. Augustine's. Trinity. Come alone. Trinity Church is the second oldest in town, according to my research, built in 1791, its stone spire visible from most points in the harbor. Unlike St. Augustine's Gothic severity, Trinity has a New England simplicity, white clapboard with black shutters. The graveyard surrounding it is smaller but seems older somehow, the stones weathered to near illegibility. I arrived early, setting up discreet recording equipment. Professional habit, yes, but also growing paranoia. Something about this town feels increasingly wrong. Subtle distortions in everyday sounds that my trained ear can't ignore. The cries of seagulls pitch-shifted into unnatural registers. The harbor waves breaking with rhythmic precision that oceans shouldn't possess. Maya arrived carrying a large leather portfolio similar to the one she'd had at our first meeting. Her expression was grave. "We should go inside," she said, eyeing my recording equipment with what looked like approval. Sound doesn't travel right out here anymore. The interior of Trinity was cool and dim, smelling of old hymnals and furniture polish. No one else was present. A closed for renovation sign hung on the door, though I saw no evidence of any work in progress. "The Reverend is a friend," Maya explained, leading me to a pew near the back. "He'll make sure we're not disturbed." She opened her portfolio and spread several documents on the wooden seat between us. They appeared to be maritime charts, but annotated extensively with handwritten notes and symbols I didn't recognize. "What I'm about to show you violates several confidentiality agreements," she said. "But after what you recorded last night, you deserve to know what you're dealing with." The first chart showed Seabrook Harbor and the surrounding coastline, dated 1738, before any of the churches were built. What caught my attention were 7 points marked on the land in red ink, forming a perfect arc around the harbor. The church locations, I realized, but this predates their construction. Maya nodded. "These maps belong to my ancestor, Chun Wei-ling. He was a navigator on the merchant vessel Prospero, which made regular stops in Seabrook throughout the early 1700s. She pointed to handwritten Chinese characters alongside the marked points. His notes described these locations as thin places, where the boundary between worlds lacks strength. According to Wei-ling, the indigenous people avoided these spots, believing they were doorways that opened when struck by certain sounds. "Like bells," I murmured. "Exactly like bells." She turned to another chart, this one showing underwater topography. "Look at the harbor floor." The bathymetric lines revealed something I hadn't expected. A perfectly circular depression in the seabed, centered precisely on the arc formed by the 7 church locations. That's not a natural formation, I said, studying the perfect geometry.
No.
It's not. Maya's voice lowered. The Geological Survey Office classifies it as an impact crater, but the dating is inconsistent with any recorded meteorite strike. And there's this. The final document was a sonar image, clearly much newer than the other charts. At the center of the circular depression was a distinct, solid shape, geometrical, with angles and proportions that seemed subtly wrong, as if designed according to mathematical principles different from our own. What am I looking at? No one knows for certain. It's approximately 30 meters across, buried under about 15 meters of silt. It was discovered during a harbor dredging operation in 1952, then promptly classified. This image was leaked to my grandmother in the 90s by a Coast Guard technician who suffered a nervous breakdown after mapping the object. My mind raced to connect these revelations with the acoustic anomalies. The churches were built as some kind of what? Containment system or a communication array. Maya traced the arc of church positions. Every 40 years, like clockwork, the bells start ringing on their own. Each cycle, the pattern is more complex, the phenomenon more pronounced. And Captain Walsh? Where does he fit in? The Coast Guard has been monitoring this situation for decades. Walsh is just the latest overseer. She began gathering the documents. But this cycle is different. They're bringing in specialized equipment, military personnel disguised as researchers. Something's changed. As if on cue, both our phones buzzed with an alert. Seabrook Maritime Safety Notice. Underwater acoustic testing scheduled for tonight, 2200 to 0400 hours. Residents may experience unusual sound patterns. No cause for concern. I showed her my screen. This doesn't seem coincidental. It's not. Maya looked grim. They're going to try to communicate with it. With what? Before she could answer, the church door opened. A slender, elderly man in clerical attire entered, moving with urgent purpose. Maya, you need to leave. Now. His voice was low but insistent. They're checking churches. Walsh has men at St. Mark's already, installing equipment. Maya quickly packed her portfolio. Dr. Mercer, this is Father Thomas Blackwood. Father, this is the acoustician I mentioned. The priest studied me with intelligent eyes that seemed to hold both wariness and resignation. The bells have chosen their instrument, then. I'm just researching historical acoustics, I protested, uncomfortable with his cryptic assessment. No one just studies the bells, Father Blackwood replied. They find you for a reason. He turned to Maya. Take the back exit. I saw a Coast Guard vehicle turning onto Harbor Street. Maya grabbed my arm. Come on. I know where we can go. As we hurried through the vestry and out a rear door, I heard Father Blackwood murmuring what sounded like a prayer in Latin. But the cadence was wrong. The syllables arranged in patterns that didn't match any liturgical Latin I'd encountered. We crossed several backyards and narrow alleys, eventually emerging near the harbor. A small boathouse stood at the end of a weathered pier, looking long abandoned. My family's old place, Maya explained, producing a key from her pocket. No one knows I still have access. Inside, the single room was dusty but organized. A small desk, filing cabinets, and walls covered with charts, newspaper clippings, and photographs spanning decades. One entire section was devoted to what appeared to be incident reports, dated at 40-year intervals. 1893, 1933, 1973, 2013. You've been preparing for this, I realized. My grandmother started this archive after what happened in '93, when the bells affected her. Maya sat heavily in the desk chair. I've spent my life trying to understand what lies beneath our harbor. What wants to come through? Through what? From where? She gestured to a framed photograph on the wall, an old black and white image of a group standing before St. Augustine's. At the center was an Asian woman in 1990s clothing, presumably Maya's grandmother, her expression distant and troubled. The bells create a harmonic bridge, Maya said quietly. A pathway between here and somewhere else. Each cycle, the entity learns more about traversing it. The sound is its medium, its method. And now it's found you. Someone who understands acoustics, who can hear what others can't. As if responding to her words, my phone emitted a strange tone. Not the standard alert sound, but something more complex, almost musical. The screen showed, "Emergency acoustic protocol initiated. Remain where you are. Coast Guard personnel will contact all civilians in Sector 7. Maya paled. That's not a standard alert format. Sector 7. It's referring to this part of town. She moved to the boathouse window, looking out at the harbor where the Coast Guard vessel was now joined by a larger ship. They're triangulating the alert signals, mapping who responds and how. Night was falling rapidly, fog rolling in as it had each evening since my arrival. But this fog seemed different, thicker, with subtle luminescence that pulsed in time with the distant foghorns. What do we do now? I asked, suddenly aware of how quickly I'd accepted the reality of our situation. That something ancient and alien was attempting to breach our world through sound. Maya's response was interrupted by what I first thought was thunder. But my trained ear recognized it instantly as a bell toll, massive and resonant, echoing across the harbor. It wasn't coming from St. Augustine's. It was coming from Trinity, the church we'd just left. And it wasn't just ringing once. It was continuing, building a complex pattern that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. "It's not midnight," Maya whispered. "They never ring before midnight." As the tolling built to a crescendo, 3 more phones began ringing inside her desk drawer. She pulled them out, old models clearly kept as backups, and all displayed the same message. Coming through now. Through the window, I saw the fog above the harbor beginning to swirl, forming a vortex directly above where the underwater object would be. And within that spiral pattern, something darker was taking shape. From the audio journal of Dr. Elias Mercer, acoustical engineer. Recording number 4, October 10th. The bells stopped ringing at Trinity just after midnight. By then, Maya and I had witnessed something I still struggle to describe scientifically. The vortex above the harbor, it defied meteorological principles. Fog doesn't move with such geometric precision, doesn't organize itself into spiraling patterns that pulse with bioluminescence. And it certainly doesn't form shapes that seem to watch you with intent. We stayed in the boathouse until dawn, listening to the increasingly frequent emergency alerts broadcast on Maya's old radio. Coast Guard advisory. Harbor closed to all civilian vessels until further notice. Seabrook emergency management. Temporary cellular service disruptions expected throughout the town. For emergencies, use landlines or report to Coast Guard personnel. NOAA weather alert. Unusual atmospheric conditions continue. Residents advised to remain indoors when fog is present. Each message sounded reasonable on the surface, but collectively they were establishing a quarantine, subtle but effective containment of Seabrook's population. Most disturbing was my acoustic equipment's readings during the bell sequence. The sound pattern from Trinity's bell wasn't chaotic. It followed a mathematical progression I recognized from my doctoral research, a specific resonance frequency that creates standing waves in enclosed spaces. But the space being resonated here wasn't the church or even the harbor. The acoustic pattern suggested something vastly larger, as if the bell were attempting to vibrate the boundaries of reality itself. "This has never happened before," Maya whispered as we watched Coast Guard vehicles patrolling the streets at first light. "The sequence is accelerating. We need to talk to Father Blackwood," I said. "He clearly knows more than he shared." Maya nodded grimly. "He's one of the keepers, a position passed down through certain families. Each church has one. Someone who knows the true purpose of the bells, which is to keep something out, or possibly in. The accounts differ." She rubbed her eyes, exhaustion evident. "But Father Blackwood is the last. The other bloodlines have died out or left town. Without them, the system is failing." We made our way cautiously to Trinity Church, avoiding main streets. The town had changed overnight. Coast Guard personnel were visible at major intersections, and unmarked vans with satellite equipment were parked near the harbor. Most unsettling were the townspeople themselves, moving with strange, mechanical precision, their faces blank as they went about their routines. "They heard the bells," Maya explained, pulling me into an alley when a group of locals passed by. "It affects different people in different ways. Some become vessels." "Vessels for what?" She didn't answer, just motioned for silence as a patrol passed. Trinity Church appeared deserted when we arrived, the closed for renovation sign still hanging on the door. Inside, the air felt thick, charged with static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. We found Father Blackwood in his office behind the sanctuary, surrounded by ancient texts and modern scientific equipment that seemed incongruous with his clerical collar. "You shouldn't have come back," he said without looking up from the device he was manipulating, something that resembled a seismograph but was measuring sound waves instead of earth movements. "It's focusing on this location now." "What is?" I asked. "We don't have names for it. The indigenous people called it the waiting voice. Early settlers referred to it as the deep caller. My predecessor used the term the frequency." He finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot from apparent sleeplessness. "It exists within and between sound waves. Our reality is merely an overtone of its fundamental vibration." His explanation resonated with advanced acoustic theories I'd studied, the concept that all matter consists of vibrating energy at different frequencies. But this took that principle into terrifying new territory. "The bells," I pressed. "They're connected to this entity?" "They were designed to create a harmonic barrier," Father Blackwood explained. "Each church positioned precisely, each bell cast with specific metallurgical properties to generate counterfrequencies." "A containment system," Maya said. "Yes, but after centuries it's learned the pattern. Now it uses the very bells meant to contain it as amplifiers, turning our defense into its pathway." He turned to me. "And it's found you, Dr. Mercer, someone who understands sound at a fundamental level. A translator." Before I could question what he meant, all our phones simultaneously emitted an alert so loud it felt like a physical blow. "Emergency evacuation notice. All residents within 1 mile of harbor must report to evacuation centers immediately." "This is not a drill." Father Blackwood's expression darkened. "It's begun. They're clearing the area for direct contact." "Who is?" "Walsh. The Coast Guard is just the public face. There's an agency that's monitored the frequency for generations. They believe they can control it, use it." His laugh was bitter. "Fools. They hear its promises but not its intentions." He moved to a wooden cabinet and unlocked it, revealing what looked like old diving equipment, but modified with unusual components and inscribed with symbols similar to those on Maya's ancestors' charts. "This was created by my predecessor in the 1970s cycle," he explained. "It allows limited protection from the frequency's influence, dampens its ability to resonate within your body." "Our body? It's affecting us physically?" The implications sent a chill through me. "Everything is vibration, Dr. Mercer. Your organs, your brain tissue, your DNA, all responsive to specific frequencies. What do you think happens when something alters those frequencies?" The memory of the townspeople's blank faces and mechanical movements suddenly took on new horror. "We need to get to St. Augustine's," Father Blackwood continued, gathering the equipment. "The original node. If we can disrupt the harmonic pattern at its source." His words were cut off by a tremendous sound. All 7 church bells in Seabrook tolling simultaneously, their discordant overlapping tones creating a nauseating acoustic interference pattern. I doubled over, my trained ear especially vulnerable to the assault. Maya pressed her hands to her ears, her face contorted in pain. Only Father Blackwood seemed able to function, quickly fitting what looked like modified headphones over my ears and Maya's. The sound immediately dampened to bearable levels. "Acoustic isolation tuned to the frequency's inverse," he explained, fitting a pair for himself. "But they won't last long. It's getting stronger." Through the window, I could see the fog returning, impossibly, given the morning sun. spiraling down from clear sky in defiance of all meteorological principles. It converged on the town in tendrils that resembled searching fingers. Father Blackwood gathered several items from his office: a tuning fork of unusual design, a small electronic device, and what appeared to be an ancient bronze dagger with a curved blade. "We have maybe an hour before Walsh's people realize the bells aren't responding to their program," he said grimly. "They're trying to establish communication using a harmonic sequence, but the frequency has already evolved beyond their understanding." As if confirming his assessment, our phones displayed a new alert: system override, protocols ineffective, resonance patterns expanding, maintain isolation. "That's not from emergency management," Maya said, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "No," Father Blackwood agreed. "That's from whatever monitors this situation from a distance. They're losing control. We left Trinity through a tunnel system I hadn't known existed. Narrow passages beneath the churchyard that Father Blackwood explained were built during Prohibition but repurposed by the keepers as emergency routes between churches. As we navigated the dimly lit passages, I noticed the walls were inscribed with symbols similar to those on Maya's charts, mathematical patterns that I recognized as wave functions and interference diagrams. Sound science dating back centuries," Father Blackwood noted, seeing my interest. "Your academic field merely rediscovered what the keepers always knew." The tunnel emerged in a small crypt beneath St. Augustine's, the air noticeably colder and charged with the same static electricity I'd felt in Trinity. Even through our protective headphones, I could feel the bells above us still tolling, the vibrations traveling through stone and soil to resonate in my chest cavity. "We need to reach the bell tower," Father Blackwood said, leading us up narrow stairs into the main church. "The original bell, the one that first called to the frequency, must be silenced permanently." The sanctuary was deserted but showed signs of recent activity. Electronic equipment scattered across pews, cables running up toward the bell tower. Walsh's monitoring system, apparently abandoned in haste. As we approached the tower access, Maya suddenly clutched my arm. "Look outside." Through the stained glass windows, the town was barely visible through swirling fog that now pulsed with distinct patterns of bioluminescence. The same mathematical sequences inscribed on the tunnel walls, now manifested in light and mist. And moving through this impossible fog were the townspeople, walking with that same mechanical precision toward the harbor. "Mass resonance," Father Blackwood murmured. "Their bodies are being tuned like instruments." "For what purpose?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. The priest's eyes were grim as he unlocked the tower door. "A chorus needs voices, Dr. Mercer, and the frequency is ready to sing its way into our world." From the audio journal of Dr. Elias Mercer, acoustical engineer. Recording number 5, October 10th evening. The bell tower of St. Augustine's was nothing like I expected. My academic mind had anticipated a simple mechanical arrangement: bell, rope, wooden framework. What we found instead defied conventional architecture and engineering principles. The tower's interior expanded impossibly, the space within larger than the exterior dimensions should allow. 7 levels of concentric platforms spiraled upward, each holding acoustic equipment from different eras, centuries of technology devoted to sound manipulation. Victorian phonographs stood alongside vacuum tubes from the 1950s and modern digital processors. All were integrated into a system that centered on the massive bronze bell suspended at the tower's heart. "The original containment apparatus," Father Blackwood explained as we climbed the narrow steps. Each generation of keepers added their own modifications as they learned more about the frequency's nature. The bell itself was mesmerizing, nearly 2 meters in diameter, its surface etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Despite the continuous tolling we'd heard outside, this bell hung motionless. "It's not moving," I observed. "How is it producing sound?" "It isn't." Father Blackwood's voice was grim. "What you're hearing is the frequency mimicking the bell's tone. It learned to replicate the sound decades ago." He moved to a control panel that looked decades old, adjusting dials with practiced precision. The government team installed modern equipment, but they don't understand the harmonic principles involved. They're like children playing with nuclear weapons. Maya circled the platform, examining the integration of old and new technology. They've connected everything to remote transmitters, she noted, pointing to recently installed black boxes with satellite uplinks. They're broadcasting the bell tones, amplifying the frequency's reach, Father Blackwood confirmed. Fools. As he worked, I studied the bell more closely. Something about its metallurgical composition seemed unusual. The bronze had an iridescent quality similar to the church's exterior stonework, with veins of an unidentifiable material running through it. What is this metal? I asked, reaching toward but not touching the surface. Don't. Father Blackwood's warning was sharp. Direct contact is dangerous without protection. The bell was cast using material from the object beneath the harbor, a fragment that washed ashore in the 1700s. That revelation sent a chill through me. You're saying the bell itself contains material from whatever the frequency is? The early settlers didn't understand what they'd found. They simply incorporated the strange metal into their most important creation, a church bell. His laugh was hollow. They believed the unusual resonance it produced was divine in nature. They built the perfect receiver. I realized, professional fascination momentarily overriding my fear. A bronze bell crafted with alien material, designed to produce powerful acoustic waves, which the frequency has been using to map our dimensional boundaries for centuries. Father Blackwood finished. Each cycle, it learns more, reaches further. A sudden movement caught my eye. Shadows shifting across the bell's surface where no shadows should be. As I watched, transfixed, the shadows congealed into distinct patterns reminiscent of the mathematical symbols in the tunnel and the bioluminescent fog. They weren't reflections. They appeared three-dimensional, as if something were pressing against the metal from within. It's responding to your presence, Maya whispered, moving closer to me. It knows who you are, what you understand. Father Blackwood abandoned the control panel and unfolded an ancient vellum document across a wooden table. This is the original diagram of the 7 churches' positions. Each forms a precise node in an acoustic interference pattern designed to create cancellation waves. The diagram showed what modern acoustic engineers would call a destructive interference array, a system designed to neutralize specific sound frequencies by generating their exact opposites. But the pattern is being corrupted, he continued, pointing to notations made in different handwritings across decades. With each cycle, the frequency adapts, finding harmonics that bypass our defenses. Like a virus mutating to resist antibiotics, I suggested. Precisely. And now, his words were cut short as all our phones simultaneously emitted a piercing tone that bypassed our protective headphones, drilling directly into my consciousness. Acoustic boundary breach imminent. Source located. For him, IT opens. The message's corrupted text flickered and shifted on the screen, the characters rearranging themselves continuously. Maya's phone displayed completely different symbols than mine, while Father Blackwood's screen showed what appeared to be spectrograms, visual representations of sound waves. It's communicating directly through our devices, Father Blackwood said, his composure finally showing cracks. This has never happened before. From outside, the sound of the bells reached a crescendo, but now layered with something else. Human voices, hundreds of them, singing in perfect unison without words, just pure tones that harmonized with the bells. The townspeople, I realized with horror, now fully resonating with the frequency. The shadows on the bell's surface writhed more vigorously, and I noticed with alarm that they were beginning to extend beyond the metal, reaching into the air like tendrils of pure darkness. Where they touched the tower's wooden beams, the material seemed to vibrate at a molecular level, becoming temporarily translucent. We're out of time, Father Blackwood said, retrieving the unusual tuning fork and electronic device from his bag. The harmonic disruption must happen now, before the boundary fully breaks. He handed me the electronic device, a crude but ingenious frequency generator built from modified hearing aid components and what appeared to be parts from old sonar equipment. You understand resonance and interference patterns better than either of us, he explained urgently. You'll need to find the exact counterfrequency while I attempt the ritual disruption. What ritual? Maya asked, her voice tight with tension. Instead of answering, Father Blackwood removed his protective headphones. The action seemed suicidal given what we knew, but before I could object, he struck the tuning fork against the bell's surface. The impact produced no audible sound but sent visible ripples through the shadow tendrils, causing them to momentarily recoil. The original frequency, he explained, his eyes now unfocused, voice strained. Established by the first keeper. It creates a temporary buffer, but I can't maintain it for long. I understood my task now. Find the mathematical opposite of whatever frequency was attempting to break through. Quickly calibrating the generator, I began scanning for the dominant wavelength patterns, my years of acoustic training finally serving a purpose I never could have imagined. Maya positioned herself at the modern equipment, disconnecting cables from the transmitters. They've locked the system, she said after several attempts to disable it. Everything's being controlled remotely now. Outside, the chorus of human voices shifted to a higher register, producing a sound that made my vision blur even through the protective headphones. Through the tower's narrow windows, I could see the harbor where the fog had formed a massive vortex extending from water to sky. Within this swirling column, darker shapes were taking form, abstract geometries that seemed to fold in on themselves in ways that violated spatial physics. Father Blackwood continued striking the tuning fork at precise intervals, sweat beading on his forehead from the evident strain. Each impact seemed to age him visibly, as if the process were draining his life force. How does he know the pattern? I asked Maya, still working frantically on the frequency generator. Blood memory, she replied grimly. The keepers pass down more than just knowledge. Their very cells remember the original frequency. That's why the bloodlines were so important. As if confirming her words, I noticed a thin stream of blood trickling from Father Blackwood's nose as he maintained the ritual. The shadow tendrils recoiled with each strike but recovered more quickly each time, growing bolder in their advances. My equipment finally locked onto the dominant frequency, a complex wave pattern unlike anything in acoustic science, with mathematical properties that suggested it originated from a dimensional framework operating under different physical laws. I began programming the counterwave, hands shaking as error messages flashed across the small screen. The device wasn't designed for this level of complexity. Father Blackwood suddenly staggered, the tuning fork slipping from his fingers. I can't, he gasped, blood now streaming from his eyes as well. It's too strong this cycle. Maya rushed to support him as he collapsed to his knees. Outside, the chorus reached an impossible pitch, and the shadow tendrils from the bell surged forward, no longer constrained. The control panel erupted with activity, lights flashing as every system activated simultaneously. The government equipment was now running automated protocols, attempting to establish a stable communication channel with whatever was pushing through. They think they can control it, Father Blackwood whispered, his voice fading. But they're just opening the door wider. My phone buzzed with a final alert, the text now completely transformed into mathematical symbols that somehow, terrifyingly, I could understand perfectly. For you I come through, for you I take form. Your understanding completes the bridge. Your voice becomes mine. As I stared at this impossible message, I felt something reach into my mind. A presence vast and ancient that perceived reality as patterns of vibration. In an instant of horrifying clarity, I understood what the frequency truly was, and why it had been seeking someone like me. It didn't want to enter our world. It wanted me to help it reshape our world's fundamental vibrational pattern to match its own. And looking into the swirling vortex above the harbor, seeing the shadows taking increasingly solid form, I feared it was already too late to stop it. From the audio journal of Dr. Elias Mercer, acoustical engineer. Recording number 6, October 10th night. The bell tower of St. Augustine's collapsed behind us as we fled into the night, the ancient structure finally surrendering to forces it was never designed to contain. Father Blackwood stumbled between Maya and me, blood still seeping from his eyes and ears, his consciousness fading in and out as the frequency penetrated deeper into his mind. "The other churches," he rasped, his voice barely audible above the cacophony of bells now ringing throughout the town. "We must disable the network." My phone vibrated in my pocket. Another emergency alert. Since leaving the tower, the notifications had become increasingly erratic, shifting between government warnings and something else, something that seemed to be using the emergency broadcast system as a vessel. I hesitated before looking, but Maya nodded grimly. We needed to know what we were facing. Emergency alert system. Civil danger warning. 10:42 p.m. October 10th. Shelter in place. Avoid all audio transmissions. Do not listen to church bells. Do not respond to voices claiming to be authorities. By order of Joint Emergency Response Command. The text flickered, distorting momentarily before stabilizing again. Something was interfering with the transmission. "Look at the timestamp," Maya pointed out. 10:42 p.m. It's 11:17 now. The alert was from 35 minutes ago, before everything at the tower had gone to hell, before the government systems had been fully compromised. I scrolled down to find 3 more alerts I'd missed while we were in the tower. Emergency alert system. Mandatory evacuation. 11:02 p.m. October 10th. Immediate evacuation ordered. All residents within 3 miles of any church. Proceed to evacuation points at Harbor Marina, Lighthouse Point, Coastal Highway Checkpoint. Military transport provided. Bring only essential items. The evacuation points, all positioned in places of maximum exposure to whatever was forming in the harbor. This wasn't an evacuation. It was a collection. The next alert had arrived just minutes later. Emergency alert system. Signal verification required. 11:09 p.m. October 10th. Disregard previous evacuation order. Confirmation code invalid. Shelter in place. Await further instructions. Do not approach water. Do not approach churches. Someone in the command structure had recognized the compromise and tried to countermand the evacuation order. But then the final alert from just 5 minutes ago. EMERGNCYALERTSYSTEM. OVRGNCNNOUNCMENT. 11:12 p.m. October 10th. LASTNFORTHEBLS. All residents proceed to nearest church. Harmonization protocol initiated. Salvation through resonance. The bells will guide you home. The corrupted text and distorted messaging confirmed what I already suspected. The frequency had gained control of the emergency alert system, using it to direct the town's population into the churches like cattle to slaughter, or worse, like instruments to be tuned. "We can't trust any alerts now," I told Maya, pocketing my phone. "The system's compromised. Can you disable it?" she asked, adjusting her grip on Father Blackwood's limp form as we hurried down the deserted street. "Not from here. The broadcast point would be..." I trailed off as realization dawned. "The police station. They have the local emergency broadcast equipment." Father Blackwood stirred, his eyes fluttering open with momentary clarity. The tone, spreading through all systems now. Phones, radios, televisions. It's distributing itself, becoming ubiquitous. The thought chilled me. My original research on historical bell patterns seemed absurdly quaint now. I'd come looking for acoustic anomalies in ancient church bells and stumbled upon an entity that communicated through vibration, that perhaps even existed as a complex pattern of frequencies. And now it was using modern technology to amplify itself exponentially. As we rounded the corner onto Main Street, we saw the first townsfolk, dozens of them walking in eerie synchronicity toward St. Michael's Church 3 blocks away. Their movements were unnaturally fluid, almost like they were floating rather than walking. None spoke, but a soft humming emanated from their throats, perfectly matching the bell tones resonating from the church ahead. "They're being summoned," Maya whispered as we ducked into an alleyway to avoid detection. Like sleepwalkers. Father Blackwood's breathing had become shallow. Not sleepwalkers, he corrected weakly. Instruments. Their bodies reconfigured as acoustic vessels. The frequency needs physical form. I watched in horror as the procession passed our hiding spot. Their faces were blank, eyes unfocused, but their mouths moved in perfect unison, producing tones that no human vocal cords should be capable of generating. Among them, I recognized the barista from the coffee shop, the clerk from my hotel, and Captain Walsh, still in his Coast Guard uniform, now marching alongside the civilians he'd been sent to protect. "We need to get to the police station," I said, mapping our route mentally. "But we can't cross Main Street with all of them out there." Maya pointed to a narrow passage between buildings. The old delivery tunnels. They run beneath most of the downtown area. My grandfather showed me when I was a child. We maneuvered Father Blackwood down a flight of moss-covered stone steps and into a dank tunnel that predated modern sewage systems. The air was heavy with moisture and decay, but at least down here, the sound of the bells was muffled. Father Blackwood suddenly convulsed, his body going rigid in our arms. His eyes flew open, revealing pupils dilated to impossible size, and when he spoke, his voice had taken on the multitonal quality we'd heard from the townspeople above. "It comes through sound. It has always come through sound," he intoned, his voice resonating strangely in the confined space. "From the void between stars, from the spaces where vibration behaves according to different laws, it has been reaching toward us, testing our dimensional boundaries." Maya and I exchanged frightened glances. This wasn't Father Blackwood speaking anymore. "The churches were built as a network," he continued, the words flowing out in a monotonous cadence. 7 points of a septagram, designed to generate the precise counterfrequency needed to prevent full manifestation. But each cycle brings adaptation, evolution. What once contained now amplifies. "Father, fight it," Maya pleaded, pressing her palm against his forehead. "Don't let it speak through you," his eyes fixed on mine with terrifying intensity. "You understand now, Dr. Mercer. Your life's work prepared you for this moment. The mathematics of sound, the physics of vibration, you were called here because you can complete the bridge." "I won't help it," I said firmly, though my voice trembled. "Whatever it wants, I won't facilitate it." Father Blackwood's mouth twisted into an unnatural smile. "You already have. Your understanding, your presence at the focal point, it created the necessary cognitive template. The human mind that could comprehend both realities simultaneously, allowing for translation between dimensional states." A horrible realization washed over me. I'd been so focused on the technical aspects of the phenomenon that I'd missed the obvious. "It wasn't just studying us through the bells," I whispered. "It was waiting for someone who could understand it." "Not someone," Father Blackwood replied, his voice now layered with multiple tones. "You specifically. Your unique neural patterns, your specialization. For centuries, it has been influencing human development, guiding certain bloodlines toward specific cognitive architectures." Maya's face paled. The keepers weren't containing it. They were breeding for it. Father Blackwood's body suddenly went slack again. Whatever had been speaking through him apparently finished. The silence that followed was broken by the distinctive buzz of all our phones activating simultaneously. Another emergency alert. Emergency alert system. Harmonic convergence notification. 11:28 p.m. October 10th. The bridge is open. Your vocal participation is required. Proceed to designated harmonic nodes. Those who sing will transcend. Those who resist will be reconfigured. All bells toll for thee. As I stared at the corrupted message, something caught my attention. A faint but distinct vibration emanating from the tunnel ahead of us. Not sound exactly, but something more tactile, a tremor that I could feel in my bones. Following the sensation, I moved deeper into the darkness, Maya reluctantly following with Father Blackwood. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber that appeared to be directly beneath the police station, a nexus point for the town's ancient infrastructure. Ancient brick walls gave way to modern concrete, and pipes and cables from different eras intertwined overhead. But what dominated the space was a sight that defied rational explanation. In the center of the chamber stood a bell. Not a church bell, but something more primitive, cast from a metal I couldn't identify. It hovered several inches above the ground, rotating slowly without any visible means of support. Around it, the air itself seemed to ripple and distort, creating patterns that matched the mathematical symbols we'd seen on our phones. "That's not possible," I breathed, my scientific mind rebelling against what my eyes were witnessing. "The original bell," Father Blackwood murmured, suddenly conscious again. "Cast from the first fragment before the churches were built. They buried it when they realized what it was doing." As we watched, transfixed, the bell began to vibrate, producing a tone so low it was felt rather than heard. The concrete floor beneath our feet rippled like water, and the walls seemed to breathe. Reality itself appeared to be responding to the frequency, becoming malleable, fluid. My phone erupted with a final alert, the screen glowing with an unnatural light as text formed not in English or any human language, but in patterns that bypassed my visual cortex entirely, embedding themselves directly into my consciousness. "I am the bell. I am the sound. I am the frequency. And now, I am the voice." The suspended bell began to spin faster, the air around it condensing into a swirling vortex. Father Blackwood pulled himself upright with surprising strength, his eyes clear for the first time in hours. "The network is complete," he said, his voice resigned. "All 7 churches active, broadcasting the frequency simultaneously. The original bell has reawakened." Maya grabbed my arm. "Can we destroy it?" I shook my head, understanding now what we were facing. "It's not really here, not fully. What we're seeing is just the point where its dimension intersects with ours. The bell is just a visual translation our minds can process." As if confirming my assessment, the bell's surface began to shift and flow, revealing glimpses of something beneath, geometries that hurt to look at, structures that couldn't exist in 3-dimensional space. Father Blackwood suddenly straightened, pulling a small device from his pocket. A crude signal jammer he must have taken from the tower before our escape. "One last countermeasure," he said grimly. "If I can disrupt the network, even briefly." Before he could finish, the bell emitted a pulse that sent us all staggering backward. The walls of the chamber flickered like a bad transmission, revealing momentary glimpses of somewhere else. A vast space filled with undulating structures that resembled organs or machinery, or perhaps both simultaneously. Above us, through the concrete ceiling, I could hear the bells of all 7 churches ringing in perfect harmony for the first time in the town's history. With dawning horror, I realized what was happening. "The dimensional boundary," I gasped. "It's not just weakening, it's dissolving completely." Father Blackwood nodded, resignation in his eyes. "Not dissolving, being reconfigured. Our reality is being tuned to match its frequency." Through the chamber's archway, we could see shadows approaching, the townspeople moving as one, descending into the tunnels. Their humming had evolved into a complex chant that matched the tones emanating from the floating bell. Leading them was Captain Walsh, his eyes now completely black, reflecting the same swirling patterns visible in the bell's surface. "You've brought Dr. Mercer," he said, his voice resonating unnaturally in the chamber. "The final component, the one who understands." Father Blackwood stepped between us and the approaching crowd, activating the signal jammer. For a brief moment, the air cleared, the bell's rotation slowed, and the townspeople faltered in their advance. "Run," he commanded us. "Find the transmitter. Break the network." I hesitated, unwilling to leave him to face whatever was coming. "Go," he shouted, his voice breaking with effort. "I can hold them, but not for long." Maya pulled me away as the townspeople surged forward, their movements jerky and disjointed as Father Blackwood's device temporarily disrupted the frequency's hold. The last thing I saw as we fled deeper into the tunnels was the old priest standing before the floating bell, the signal jammer held high, as dozens of hands reached for him from the darkness. Behind us, all 7 church bells tolled in perfect harmony, and something ancient and vast continued its emergence into our world, using sound itself as its gateway. From the audio journal of Dr. Elias Mercer, acoustical engineer. Recording number 7, October 11th, early morning. The deeper tunnels beneath the town weren't on any modern map. Maya navigated by memory, recalling her grandfather's stories of smugglers' passages that predated the town's official founding. The air grew colder as we descended, heavy with moisture and something else. A metallic tang that reminded me of blood. "We need to find a way up to the police station," I whispered, though I doubted anything could hear us over the persistent tolling of bells that penetrated even these depths. "The emergency broadcast equipment. We can't go back that way," Maya interrupted, her voice tight with fear. "They'll be waiting. There's another route through the old lighthouse keeper's cellar. It connects to the municipal building basement." My phone had stopped receiving signals, the screen displaying only a pulsing pattern that matched the rhythm of the bells above. I switched on my flashlight app, casting harsh shadows along the tunnel walls. What I saw made me freeze in mid-step. The walls were changing. The ancient brickwork was developing a subtle iridescence similar to the bell metal, with tiny veins of unknown material spreading like mycelia through the mortar. When I touched one wall experimentally, it felt less like stone and more like something organic, slightly yielding, with a faint warmth that brick shouldn't possess. "The transformation is spreading," I observed, trying to maintain scientific detachment despite my mounting horror. "Whatever process the bells initiated, it's affecting physical matter now." Maya nodded grimly. "My grandfather's journals mentioned something similar during the 1947 incident. He called it the calcification, when the boundaries between dimensions grow thin enough that physical laws begin to blend." We pressed on, the tunnel gradually sloping upward toward what Maya assured me was the lighthouse keeper's residence. I checked my watch, 2:17 a.m. We'd been moving through these tunnels for nearly 3 hours, though it felt like minutes. Time itself seemed to be behaving strangely, compressed in some moments and stretched in others. The tunnel ended at a rusted iron door, its surface covered in the same iridescent veining we'd seen on the walls. Maya pushed it open with effort, revealing a stone cellar lined with ancient shelving units still stocked with preserved foods and navigational equipment. "This house hasn't been occupied in decades," she explained, leading me up a narrow staircase. "The last keeper disappeared during the 1947 incident. They automated the lighthouse afterward." At the top of the stairs, we emerged into what had once been a quaint cottage kitchen. Now, however, it was transformed. The wooden floorboards rippled like water frozen in midwave. The walls curved at impossible angles, creating spaces that seemed deeper than the exterior dimensions of the house should allow. Most disturbing of all, the windows didn't show the harbor or town. Instead, they displayed a landscape of undulating forms that resembled no terrain on Earth. "Don't look directly at it," Maya warned, covering the nearest window with a tattered curtain. "What you're seeing, it's not meant for human perception." A sound from outside caught our attention. Not bells this time, but a mechanical whirring followed by a burst of static. Then, reverberating through the transformed cottage, came an automated announcement. "Attention citizens of Port Haven. This is a military emergency broadcast. The town is now under quarantine. All residents must remain indoors. Sound restriction protocols are in effect. Unauthorized audio transmission is prohibited. Compliance is mandatory." The military was still fighting back, still trying to contain what was happening. Through a gap in the curtains, I caught glimpses of helicopter searchlights sweeping across the town, illuminating a landscape increasingly alien in its geometry. "They don't understand," I said, more to myself than to Maya. "They think this is something they can quarantine, something with physical boundaries. It was always going to end this way," Maya replied, her voice hollow as she rummaged through an old desk drawer. "The keepers knew. Each cycle brought the frequency closer to achieving resonance. This time, She trailed off, pulling out a folded map of the town. Spreading it across the warped kitchen table, she traced a route with her finger. The police station is here, 3 blocks from the municipal building. If we can get to the emergency broadcast equipment, what exactly are you planning to do? I hesitated, formulating my thoughts. The frequency operates on principles of resonance and amplification. If I can generate a counterfrequency, a destructive interference pattern, I might be able to disrupt the network at least temporarily. Like noise-canceling headphones, Maya observed. On a much larger scale, I confirmed. But I'll need direct access to their broadcast system. Maya studied the map intently. There's a service tunnel that runs beneath Main Street, connecting the municipal building to the police station. It was built during the Cold War as an evacuation route for town officials. The cottage suddenly shook violently, dishes rattling off shelves as a deep, subsonic vibration passed through the structure. Through the covered windows came flashes of unnatural light, followed by the unmistakable sound of helicopters in distress, rotors beating erratically before a distant crash and explosion. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Despite the lack of signal, a new message had somehow appeared on the screen. Emergency Alert System. Reality Reconfiguration Notice. 2:23 a.m. October 11th. Dimensional boundaries collapsing. All perception filters disabled. Witness the true nature. Accept the harmonic transformation. The bells toll for all worlds now. Almost immediately afterward, another alert appeared. This one clearly from military sources, the formatting rigid and official. Joint Military Command. Emergency Evacuation Order. 2:24 a.m. October 11th. Operation Sound Barrier compromised. All personnel withdraw to minimum safe distance. Oral isolation protocols in effect. Mission status. Containment failure. Contingency Omega authorized. They're pulling out, I realized with growing dread. Whatever Contingency Omega is, it can't be good for anyone left in town. Maya's expression darkened. In 1947, according to my grandfather, the military's final contingency involved an experimental sonic weapon designed to create a catastrophic disruption across all frequency ranges. They believed it would destroy the frequency but abandoned the plan when they calculated the civilian casualties. And now they've authorized it, I concluded grimly. We gathered what supplies we could find: flashlights, a battery-powered radio that emitted only bell tones no matter which frequency we tuned it to, and a key Maya found that she said would access the service tunnel. As we prepared to leave the relative safety of the cottage, the radio suddenly cleared, the bell tones replaced by a human voice. Captain Walsh, his speech pattern strange and stilted. Dr. Mercer, we know you can hear this. The convergence requires your participation. Your understanding of acoustic mathematics is the final component in the translation matrix. Come to St. Michael's Church. Father Blackwood awaits you there. Maya switched off the radio immediately, but the damage was done. They knew we were alive, knew what we were planning. Father Blackwood is dead, she said firmly. Whatever is using his voice, it isn't him. I nodded, though a part of me wondered if that was entirely true. What the frequency had demonstrated so far suggested not destruction of consciousness but transformation, a reconfiguration of physical and mental patterns to match its own dimensional structure. We left through the cottage's back door, emerging into a night transformed beyond recognition. The sky above Port Haven no longer showed stars, but instead rippled with undulating patterns of light that formed and dissolved in time with the never-ending bell tolls. The streets had begun to warp and fold, cobblestones flowing like liquid in some places while rising into impossible spirals in others. Most disturbing of all was the harbor. The water had ceased to behave as a liquid, instead forming a massive, slowly rotating column that stretched from sea level up into the transformed sky. Within this column, shapes moved, vast, geometric forms that folded through dimensions our eyes couldn't properly process. In the distance, St. Michael's Church glowed with an impossible radiance, its bell tower now twice as tall as it should have been, the architecture stretching and distorting as we watched. Around its base, hundreds of townspeople stood in concentric circles, swaying in perfect synchronization as they emitted the harmonic tones that matched the bells. We hugged the shadows of buildings, making our way toward the municipal center. The structures we passed were in various stages of transformation, some merely showing the iridescent veining we'd seen in the tunnels, others completely reconfigured into alien geometries. A military helicopter passed overhead, its searchlight sweeping erratically across the transformed landscape. The craft itself appeared to be struggling against the town's altered physics, its flight path jerky and unstable. As we watched, the light illuminated a group of figures moving down the street toward us. Townspeople, but changed. Their bodies had begun to adapt to the frequency's influence. Limbs elongated at impossible angles, torsos twisted in ways human anatomy shouldn't permit, and most disturbing of all, their skin displayed the same iridescent quality as the transformed materials around town. They moved with unnatural fluidity, as if partially freed from gravity's constraints. We ducked into a narrow alley, pressing ourselves against the wall as they passed. Their faces revealed the most profound transformation, features flattened and rearranged into patterns that echoed the mathematical symbols from the emergency alerts. Where eyes should have been, they had pulsing vortices of darkness that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. "They're becoming conduits," I whispered, scientific fascination momentarily overriding my fear. "Physical vessels reformatted to channel the frequency between dimensions." Maya's reply was cut short by another violent tremor that shook the entire town. A massive crack formed in the street, revealing not earth beneath but a pulsing network of iridescent veins. From this fissure rose a sound so profound it bypassed our ears entirely, vibrating directly through our bodies. A deep, resonant tone that made my vision blur and my thoughts scatter. In that moment of disorientation, I felt something brush against my consciousness. A vast, alien presence that perceived reality as patterns of vibration. For a terrifying instant, I understood what the frequency truly wanted. Not destruction but synthesis, a merging of dimensional frameworks to create something entirely new. The contact broke as suddenly as it had formed, leaving me gasping and disoriented. Maya grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the municipal building now visible at the end of the street. "They know we're here," she hissed. "They can feel your presence, your understanding." As if confirming her words, every transformed citizen on the street suddenly turned in our direction, their vortex eyes fixating on us with terrible precision. In perfect unison, they began to advance, their mouths opening to emit the same harmonic tones as the bells. We ran, no longer concerned with stealth, as the transformed townspeople converged behind us. The municipal building loomed ahead, its classical architecture now twisted into impossible forms, windows pulsing with the same iridescent light that permeated everything. At the building's base, a figure awaited us. Captain Walsh, his Coast Guard uniform now fused with his transformed flesh, the fabric and skin displaying the same flowing iridescence. His eyes had become the same absorbing vortices as the others, but he retained enough of his original features that I recognized him instantly. "Dr. Mercer," he said, his voice layered with multitonal harmonics. "The final component arrives. Your resistance is unnecessary. The convergence offers transcendence beyond your limited perception." Behind him, the massive doors of the municipal building swung open, revealing not the expected interior but a pulsing tunnel of light that seemed to bend back on itself in impossible ways. "Father Blackwood attempted to preserve your obsolete dimensional framework," Walsh continued, gesturing toward the tunnel. "But he now understands the truth. Come and see what he has become, what we are all becoming." As he spoke, the sky above split open like a wound, revealing a vast space beyond our reality. A place where sound and light and matter were indistinguishable from one another, where consciousness itself existed as patterns of vibration. The crack widened as all 7 church bells tolled in perfect harmony, the sound physically ripping at the fabric of our dimension. Reality was collapsing around us, and somewhere in the heart of that collapse waited the frequency. an entity of pure vibration that had been reaching toward our world for centuries, using the bells as its bridge. And it wanted me to complete that bridge. From the audio journal of Dr. Elias Mercer, acoustical engineer. Recording number 8, October 11th, deep night. Maya reacted before I could, hurling a chunk of fractured pavement at Captain Walsh's transformed face. The projectile passed directly through him, his form rippling like water before reforming, undamaged. Physical resistance cannot affect vibrational entities, Walsh said, his multi-layered voice resonating with something like pity. Your understanding is incomplete, Dr. Mercer. You perceive only three-dimensional echoes of our true form. I grabbed Maya's arm and pulled her toward a narrow side alley, away from the pulsating doorway and the advancing townspeople. Walsh made no move to pursue us, his distorted features arranging into what might have been a smile. The permutations of your escape are finite, he called after us. All paths lead to resonance. We will be waiting. The alley twisted unnaturally, its brick walls breathing and pulsing with iridescent veins that grew visibly thicker as we ran. My sense of direction became increasingly unreliable. Passages that should have been straight now curved and looped back on themselves, and doorways opened to reveal impossible geometries. The service tunnel, Maya gasped, pointing to a maintenance entrance partially concealed behind a dumpster. If we can reach the police station. The metal door was covered in the same iridescent growth, the lock mechanism already partially melded with the surrounding frame. Maya's key entered with difficulty, and the grinding sound as she turned it felt wrong. Metal scraping against something softer, more yielding. Inside, the tunnel stretched before us, illuminated by emergency lighting that flickered in rhythm with the distant bells. The concrete walls displayed the same transformative process we'd seen throughout town, but more advanced here. Entire sections had reconfigured into flowing, organic structures that resembled audio waveforms frozen in three-dimensional space. We moved cautiously, our flashlights revealing disturbing details with each step. The floor beneath our feet had developed a subtle elasticity, like walking on flesh rather than concrete. Small pools of mercury-like liquid had formed in depressions, each rippling in perfect synchronization with the bell tolls despite the lack of direct vibration. My phone vibrated again. Another emergency alert penetrating despite the lack of cell service. Emergency alert system. Dimensional interface notification.
3h17 du matin OCT11.
Reality parameters shifting. Standard physics no longer reliable. Your sensory apparatus is being upgraded. Resistance causes unnecessary distortion. The bells synchronize all dimensions. Almost immediately afterward, the military's counter-alert appeared. Joint Military Command. Final Civilian Advisory. 3:18 a.m. October 11th. Cognitive hazard detected. Disregard all previous alerts. Evacuation deadline. 4 a.m. Acoustic countermeasure deployment imminent. Use any means to exit town limits. 1 hour, Maya whispered, reading over my shoulder. Whatever they're planning, they're doing it at 4 a.m. A tremendous vibration suddenly passed through the tunnel, the concrete walls rippling like pond water. The emergency lights failed simultaneously, leaving us in darkness broken only by our flashlights. In that moment of transition, I heard, or perhaps felt, something moving in the darkness ahead. We're not alone, I murmured, sweeping my light down the tunnel. The beam caught something that defied description. A flowing mass of what appeared to be vibrating particles, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. As my light touched it, the mass reacted, the particles reorganizing into a crude approximation of a human form. With mounting horror, I recognized the face forming within the mass. Father Blackwood, his features distorted but unmistakable. But this wasn't the priest we'd known. His body seemed composed of tiny particles of the iridescent material, held together in human shape by some unknown force. Dr. Mercer, he said, his voice a chorus of overlapping tones. You continue to resist what you've been prepared to become. Father Blackwood is dead, Maya stated flatly, though her voice trembled, the figure's head tilted at an impossible angle. Father Blackwood has transcended what you understand as life. As have I. Who are you? I demanded, scientific curiosity momentarily overpowering fear. I am Captain Leonard Walsh. I am Father Thomas Blackwood. I am all who have accepted harmonization. The figure's form shifted, briefly displaying Walsh's features before returning to Blackwood's. Individual consciousness persists within the greater resonance. Not destroyed, synthesized. The implications staggered me. You're a collective consciousness. A more accurate translation would be a harmonic convergence of vibrational patterns that you perceive as consciousness. The entity corrected. Your concept of individuality is a limitation of three-dimensional existence. Maya edged backward, pulling me with her. What do you want with us? With him, the Blackwood entity gestured, particles flowing like liquid to form an arm pointing at me. Dr. Mercer's neural architecture represents the perfect translation conduit. His understanding of acoustic mathematics creates a bridge between perception frameworks. You need me to complete the convergence, I realized, remembering Walsh's words, to help you translate your reality into ours. Not translation, the entity corrected. Synthesis, a harmonic merger of dimensional vibrations to create something beyond both. Your world has been shaped for centuries toward this convergence. The Church's position to form a resonance array, bloodlines guided to produce specific neural patterns, technology developed to amplify and distribute the frequency. As it spoke, the tunnel around us accelerated its transformation, concrete flowing like wax to form patterns that matched the mathematical symbols I'd seen in the alerts. Reality itself seemed increasingly malleable, responding to the entity's presence. And if I refuse? I asked, though I suspected the answer. Refusal is temporary. The convergence approaches critical resonance with or without your conscious participation. Your understanding merely facilitates a more harmonious transition. Before I could respond, the tunnel shook violently as a massive explosion sounded from the direction of the harbor. The Blackwood entity's form destabilized momentarily, particles scattering before reforming. The military's countermeasures begin, it observed, its multi-layered voice betraying what might have been concern. Crude attempts to disrupt the harmonic convergence through destructive interference. Another explosion followed, closer this time, and the emergency lights flickered back to life, revealing the full extent of the tunnel's transformation. What had been a simple concrete passage now resembled the interior of some vast organism. Walls pulsing with iridescent veins that carried pulses of light in rhythm with the distant bells. You should hurry to the police station, the Blackwood entity said, its form beginning to dissolve. Your attempt to create a counter-frequency is predicted. It is part of the pattern. All actions serve the convergence. As the entity dissipated into the air, Maya tugged urgently at my arm. We need to move now. Whatever the military is doing, I don't think they care who gets caught in it anymore. We pressed forward through the increasingly organic tunnel, the walls now undulating around us like a living esophagus. The air had grown thick with microscopic particles that glowed faintly, each one vibrating in perfect harmony with the bells. I don't understand, Maya said as we navigated the transformed passage. If it can predict what we're going to do, why let us proceed? Why not just stop us? The question had been bothering me as well. I began trying to organize my thoughts. I think it's because the frequency doesn't operate according to our concept of causality. It perceives time as another vibrational pattern, sees all potential outcomes simultaneously. Then it knows whether we'll succeed or fail, Maya concluded grimly. I think it knows that every action we take, whether resistance or cooperation, ultimately serves the convergence, I replied. We're not fighting against it. We're playing a role in a pattern we can't fully comprehend. The thought was more terrifying than any physical threat. If even our resistance was anticipated, incorporated into the frequency's plans, what hope did we have? Another explosion rocked the tunnel, this one close enough to send us staggering against the pulsing walls. Where my hand touched the transformed surface, I felt a jolt of connection, a momentary glimpse of perception beyond human senses, a vast network of vibrational patterns extending across dimensions. In that instant of connection, I understood something profound about the frequency. It wasn't malevolent in any human sense. It simply existed according to principles so alien to our reality that its very presence restructured our dimension to match its own. The harmonic convergence wasn't conquest but inevitability. Two incompatible vibrational states resolving into a new pattern. The connection broke as Maya pulled me away from the wall. "Don't touch anything," she warned. "The transformation is accelerating." We reached the end of the service tunnel, emerging into the basement of the police station. Like everything else in town, the building had begun to transform, but the process seemed less advanced here, perhaps due to the military's countermeasures disrupting the harmonics. The basement housed the emergency management center, including the broadcasting equipment we sought. Unlike the municipal building, the room remained recognizably human: banks of computers, radio equipment, and a central console for the emergency alert system. "This is it," I said, approaching the main console. "If I can access the broadcast system, I might be able to generate a counter-frequency." Maya secured the door behind us while I examined the equipment. The system was still operational, though the screens displayed the same iridescent patterns we'd seen throughout town. When I touched the keyboard, the patterns responded, reorganizing into familiar emergency alert formatting. "It's letting me in," I observed with unease. "Almost like it wants me to try this." As I began working with the broadcast parameters, setting up what I hoped would be a destructive interference pattern, my phone vibrated with another alert. "Emergency alert system. Convergence acceleration notice. 3:42 a.m. October 11th. Dimensional merger at 87%.
Translation conduit activated.
Your participation is acknowledged. Your resistance completes the pattern." All bells ring as one. A chill ran through me as I realized the truth. Even this, my attempt to disrupt the frequency, had been anticipated. Somehow, my understanding of acoustics, my effort to create a counter-frequency, was itself the final component needed to complete the convergence. "It's using me," I whispered, hands hovering over the keyboard, using my knowledge of acoustics to perfect the translation between dimensional states. Maya's reply was cut short by another violent explosion, this one directly above us. The ceiling cracked, iridescent material flowing through the fissures like blood from a wound. Through the gaps, I caught glimpses of the night sky, no longer dark but filled with swirling patterns of light that matched the mathematical symbols from the alerts. "We're out of time," Maya urged. "Whatever you're going to do it now." With trembling hands, I completed the programming sequence, creating what should have been a perfect destructive interference pattern calibrated to the frequencies of the church bells. As I prepared to broadcast, however, a new awareness dawned, an understanding so profound it momentarily paralyzed me. The counter-frequency I designed wasn't going to stop the frequency. It was going to complete it. In my effort to create the perfect opposition, I'd inadvertently designed the final component needed for dimensional synthesis, the mathematical bridge between incompatible vibrational states. And as my finger hovered over the broadcast button, I realized why the frequency had been waiting all these centuries for someone with my specific understanding of acoustics. It needed me to compose the final note in a symphony that would transform reality itself. From the audio journal of Dr. Elias Mercer, acoustical engineer. Recording number 9, October 12th, Dawn's Edge. I pressed the broadcast button. In that moment of decision, I felt no dramatic hesitation, no final doubt. Just the cold certainty that whatever choice I made had always been inevitable. The counter-frequency I designed began to transmit, its mathematical perfection radiating outward to meet the frequency's harmonics. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then every bell in town began to toll simultaneously. The sound was unlike anything terrestrial, not merely loud but somehow fundamental, as though reality itself were vibrating. The walls of the police station rippled like disturbed water, the iridescent veins pulsing with increasing intensity as the counter-frequency I'd broadcast interacted with the frequency's harmonics. "What have you done?" Maya screamed, her voice barely audible above the bells. Before I could answer, my phone lit up with a final alert. Emergency alert system. Convergence complete.
4 heures du matin au CT12.
Dimensional synthesis achieved.
Translation conduit Fulfied.
Gratitude expressed. All bells ring as one. The military's counter-alert appeared seconds later, but the text was garbled, fragmented symbols that no longer formed coherent language. Whatever countermeasures they'd planned had come too late. The floor beneath us buckled, walls dissolving into swirling patterns of iridescent particles. Maya grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with terror and something else, a dawning recognition that matched my own growing understanding. "The bells were never the source," I said, the realization striking me with perfect clarity. "They were just the resonators, amplifying something that was always here, waiting to be heard." The ceiling collapsed inward, but instead of debris, we were showered with particles of light that hung suspended in the air, vibrating in complex patterns. Through the opening, the sky was no longer recognizable, a vast mathematical topology of intersecting waveforms that bent the very fabric of space. Captain Walsh appeared at the doorway, his body now fully transformed into the same particle structure we'd seen earlier. Behind him stood at least a dozen townspeople, all in various stages of transformation, their bodies becoming vessels for the frequency's physical manifestation. "The harmonization accelerates," Walsh said, his voice a chorus of overlapping tones. "You've completed the bridge, Dr. Mercer. The final equation is solved." Maya pressed herself against me, whispering, "Is there anything we can do?" I shook my head, watching as the particles in the air began to form intricate three-dimensional symbols, mathematical expressions of dimensional translation, acoustic formulas that defied known physics. "Not to stop it," I replied, "but maybe to shape what comes next." A new figure pushed through the crowd of transformed townspeople, Father Blackwood, or what remained of him. Unlike the others, his transformation seemed incomplete, his human form still partially intact though veined with iridescent light. "I've held back," he rasped, his voice fluctuating between human speech and something more harmonic. "Centuries of guardianship, waiting for this moment." He approached with difficulty, each step clearly causing him pain as he fought against the complete dissolution of his human form. "The bells were never meant to summon," he continued, reaching out a hand that flickered between flesh and vibrating particles. "They were meant to contain, to bind what came before to a dormant state." "What are you saying?" I demanded. "The churches were built as a prison," Father Blackwood explained, his eyes momentarily clearing to reveal their human intelligence. "The bells were the locks, their harmonics maintaining the dimensional barrier. But over time, the entity learned, adapted, began to use the very sounds that imprisoned it to communicate, to influence." Walsh's multi-layered voice cut in, "Limitation is temporary. Evolution is inevitable. The barrier served its purpose until the frequency could be properly understood." Father Blackwood shook his head violently, fighting for control. "I am the last of the Order of the Bell. We've maintained the vigil for generations, silencing the bells when they began to ring of their own accord. But the pattern was always moving toward completion," Walsh countered. "Even your resistance was factored into the equation." Another violent tremor shook the building, and through the shattered walls, I could see the church spires throughout town, each one now a column of swirling iridescent light reaching toward the transformed sky. Between them, the air itself had become visibly distorted, reality bending inward like fabric being pulled from multiple points. Father Blackwood clutched at my arm, his touch alternating between solid and incorporeal. "There's still one chance," he whispered urgently. "The original bell beneath St. Michael's crypt. If it can be rung in counter-rhythm to the convergence." "He speaks of the anchor point," Walsh said, his form rippling with what might have been concern. The harmonization is not yet irreversible. Father Blackwood's gaze met mine with desperate intensity. The original bell was forged to bind the entity. Its metal contains elements not found on Earth. If it's rung now, at the moment of weakest dimensional stability, his voice trailed off as his body convulsed, the transformation accelerating. With a final effort of will, he pressed something into my hand, a small ancient key. The crypt access, he managed. Hurry! Maya pulled me toward the door, surprisingly clear-headed despite the chaos. We need to try, she insisted. What do we have to lose? Walsh and the transformed townspeople made no move to stop us as we pushed past them. If anything, they seemed curious, watching our desperate flight with the detached interest of scientists observing an experiment. Outside, the town had become unrecognizable. Buildings had lost their solid form, walls and streets flowing together in patterns that mimicked the mathematical symbols flashing across the sky. The air felt thick, resistant, each step requiring deliberate effort as though we were moving through viscous liquid. St. Michael's is 3 blocks east, Maya called, pointing toward a particularly intense column of light that marked the church's location. As we struggled forward, I noticed something profoundly disturbing about our surroundings. The transformation wasn't merely physical, it was conceptual. Boundaries between separate objects had become relative rather than absolute. A fire hydrant we passed seemed simultaneously connected to and separate from the sidewalk, both objects occupying the same space without contradiction. Other townspeople moved through this altered reality, some fully transformed like Walsh, others still partially human but moving with the vacant expressions of sleepwalkers. None attempted to interfere with us. Either they were too absorbed in their own transformation or, more likely, our actions were still proceeding according to the frequency's calculations. St. Michael's Church loomed ahead, its Victorian architecture now a fluid sculpture of light and motion. The stone walls breathed and pulsed, the stained glass windows displaying not biblical scenes but flowing mathematical equations. The bell tower had become a column of pure vibrational energy, reaching up to connect with the transformed sky. How do we get to the crypt? Maya shouted over the overwhelming harmonic resonance emanating from the structure. I clutched Father Blackwood's key tightly. There should be an exterior entrance. Most old churches built crypts with separate access points. We circled the building, finding a small stone archway nearly hidden by undulating iridescent growth. The ancient iron door within the arch seemed remarkably solid compared to our surroundings, resisting the transformation affecting everything else. The key fit perfectly, turning with surprising ease. The door swung open to reveal a narrow stairway descending into darkness. As we began our descent, I felt a subtle change in the air, a thinning of the frequency's presence, as though the crypt existed in a pocket of relative stability within the transforming reality. I can think more clearly down here, Maya observed. Something's protecting this space. The stairs led to a small antechamber lined with ancient stone. Unlike the chaos above, this space remained largely unchanged, though faint iridescent veins traced patterns along the floor, growing thicker as they approached a second door at the far end. This door required no key. It swung open at my touch, revealing the crypt beyond. At its center stood not a bell in the traditional sense, but an object that defied easy description, a roughly bell-shaped mass of dark metal that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Surrounding it were engraved stone slabs bearing symbols similar to those I'd seen in the alerts, though clearly far older. The original bell, I whispered, approaching it cautiously. As I drew closer, I felt a curious resistance, as though the air around the bell was somehow denser, more resistant to movement. The surface of the metal wasn't smooth but covered in minute engravings, mathematical formulas, and what appeared to be star charts dating back centuries. How do we ring it? Maya asked, her voice hushed. I examined the bell carefully, noticing a small hammer mechanism attached to its side, connected to an elaborate clockwork system built into the floor. It's designed to be struck in a specific pattern, I realized, studying the mechanism. The timing is crucial. It must create a precise counter-frequency. Above us, the harmonics of the church bells intensified, the very air vibrating with increasing amplitude. Dust and small fragments of stone began falling from the ceiling as the crypt's protection weakened. "Whatever you're going to do it quickly," Maya urged, bracing herself against a stone column as the ground trembled. I knelt beside the clockwork mechanism, recognizing elements of acoustic mathematics in its design, principles I'd studied my entire career without understanding their true origin. The mechanism was a physical representation of counterharmonic theory, designed to strike the bell in a pattern that would generate perfect destructive interference. "I need to set the pattern," I explained, adjusting the gears according to my understanding of the frequency's harmonics. "If Father Blackwood was right, this will disrupt the convergence at its most vulnerable point." The clockwork responded to my adjustments with unexpected fluidity, as though it had been waiting for precisely this moment. As I worked, I became increasingly aware of another presence in the crypt. Not something visible, but a pressure in the air, a weight of attention. Captain Walsh's voice echoed from the antechamber, though he himself didn't appear. "The original bell is part of the convergence pattern, Dr. Mercer. This counter-frequency is anticipated and incorporated. Your actions complete the circle." I hesitated, hands hovering over the mechanism. Was this another trap? Had the frequency predicted even this desperate countermeasure? "He's trying to stop you," Maya insisted. "That has to mean something." A violent tremor shook the crypt, larger chunks of masonry falling around us. Through the cracking ceiling, I could see the sky above, no longer anything recognizable as Earth's atmosphere, but a churning vortex of mathematical symbols, a window into dimensional space. I made my decision, completing the final adjustments to the clockwork. The mechanism began to move of its own accord, gears turning with increasing speed as the hammer prepared to strike. "Get back," I warned Maya, pulling her away from the bell. The first strike rang out, a sound so fundamentally wrong it sent pain shooting through my skull. The tone seemed to exist simultaneously at multiple frequencies, creating a discordant harmony that fought against the frequency's patterns. Walsh's voice rose in what might have been alarm. "You misunderstand your role, Dr. Mercer. The original bell is not opposition, it is counterpoint. Together, they complete the symphony." The hammer struck again and again, picking up speed as the clockwork mechanism accelerated. Each impact produced a tone more alien than the last, the sounds layering into a complex counterharmonic that seemed to bend the very air around us. Maya clutched my arm, her expression a mixture of hope and terror. "Is it working?" Before I could answer, the ceiling of the crypt shattered completely, the walls following suit as reality itself began to fold inward around the bell. The hammer continued to strike, each impact sending visible ripples through the dimensional fabric. Through the collapsing structure, I could see all 7 church spires throughout town, each one now a pillar of light connecting to a central point directly above St. Michael's. The transformed townspeople had gathered in the streets, their particle forms oriented toward the convergence point, vibrating in harmony with the bells. And at that central point, something was emerging, a pattern so complex it defied visual processing, a dimensional intersection manifesting in our reality. It pulsed with each strike of the original bell, but rather than disrupting the manifestation, the counter-frequency seemed to be stabilizing it, providing the framework for its emergence. "It's using the counter-frequency," I realized with horror. "The original bell isn't opposing the frequency, it's completing it. The perfect mathematical counterpoint needed for stable dimensional synthesis." Father Blackwood materialized beside us, his form now almost entirely transformed into vibrating particles. His expression showed a terrible understanding. "I was wrong," he said, his voice barely recognizable. "We all were. The order of the bell didn't imprison the entity, we prepared for its arrival. Generations of guardians, maintaining the harmonics, waiting for the moment when someone with the right understanding would complete the pattern." The original bell's strikes reached a crescendo, perfectly synchronized with the tolling of all 7 church bells. The air between them shimmered, solidified, became something both present and not present simultaneously. A bridge between incompatible states of existence. "What have we done?" Maya whispered, her hand finding mine as we watched the transformation reach its culmination. From the intersection point above St. Michael's, a new frequency began to emanate. Not sound as we understood it, but a fundamental reorganization of vibrational patterns that constituted reality itself. It spread outward in concentric waves, each pulse accelerating the transformation of everything it touched. As the wave reached us, I felt my perception expanding, consciousness stretching to encompass sensory dimensions I'd never known existed. Maya's hand in mine became simultaneously more solid and less distinct, our boundaries blurring even as our connection intensified. The original bell struck one final time, a perfect harmonic resolution that completed the pattern. In that moment, I understood what the frequency truly was: not an invasion, not a corruption, but an evolution of reality itself. And as the dimensional synthesis reached completion, as the church bell's toll merged with the counterfrequency into a single perfect harmony, I realized that everything, the town, the order of the bell, my own studies in acoustics, had been leading to this moment since the beginning. The bells had never been a warning. They had been an invitation, and we had finally answered. From the scattered audio fragments recovered from personal device of Dr. Elias Mercer, acoustical engineer. Final recording, date unknown. I don't know how long it's been since the bells completed their harmony. Time doesn't flow the same way anymore. It pools and eddies, sometimes rushing forward, sometimes circling back on itself. I record these thoughts during moments of relative lucidity, when my consciousness coalesces into something resembling my former self. The transformation wasn't what we expected. Not destruction, not replacement, but integration. The frequency didn't erase our world. It expanded it, folded it into something larger, more complex. Reality hasn't ended. It's been tuned to a different key. Maya and I survived, if survival is the right word for what we've become. We're still recognizably ourselves, but our boundaries have grown permeable. Sometimes I catch glimpses of her consciousness brushing against mine, thoughts and memories flowing between us like water seeking its level. Yesterday, or what felt like yesterday, I experienced a childhood memory of climbing a cherry tree behind a blue house, though I grew up in an apartment building and never climbed trees. The memory was Maya's, experienced as vividly as my own. The town still exists, though changed beyond recognition. Buildings maintain their general shape but shift and realign according to harmonic principles rather than physical ones. Streets connect locations that make sense acoustically rather than spatially, joining points that resonate at compatible frequencies. St. Michael's Church has become the focal point of this new topology. Not a physical structure anymore, but a standing wave, a permanent vibration in the fabric of the merged reality. Most of the townspeople remain, transformed to varying degrees depending on their proximity to the churches during the convergence. Some, like Captain Walsh, have fully integrated with the frequency, their consciousness distributed throughout the new reality like notes in a chord. Others, like Maya and I, retain more individuality, perhaps because we were in the crypt when the final harmonization occurred. I found my phone yesterday, its screen displaying a continuous stream of emergency alerts that loop and evolve as I watch. Integration progress monitoring. Harmonic adaptation phase. Date. Symbol untranslatable. Human perception expanding. Episodic time transitioning to harmonic time. Adapting neural pathways for multidimensional cognition. Your discomfort is temporary. Your consciousness is being preserved. The military never launched their final countermeasure, or perhaps they did, and it simply became another note in the frequency's composition. The perimeter they established around the town has evolved into something else. Not a barrier, but an adaptation zone. A gradient where the laws of our former reality gradually blend into the new harmonic principles. Visitors occasionally wander in, confused travelers or curious thrill seekers drawn by rumors of a town that disappeared. I've watched them from afar, observed their initial wonder as they encounter the transformed landscape, followed by growing unease as they begin to feel the first subtle changes in their perception. Some flee before the process takes hold. Others stay too long and become partially integrated, returning to the outside world fundamentally changed, hearing echoes of bell tones in every sound. Father Blackwood was right in his way. The original bell was indeed the key, not to stopping the convergence but to stabilizing it, ensuring the transformation proceeded with minimal distortion. The order of the bell had preserved that knowledge across generations, though its true meaning had become obscured over time. They weren't jailers but preparators, maintaining the harmonic infrastructure needed for eventual integration. I found him yesterday, or what remains of him, a pattern of vibrations anchored to the former site of St. Michael's, still recognizably Blackwood in its fundamental frequency, but expanded into something more comprehensive. He communicated with me not through words, but through modulated resonances that my transformed consciousness could somehow interpret. We were never meant to stop it, his pattern expressed, only to prepare for it, to ensure the transition occurred with minimal loss. Our order preserved the bells, maintained their tuning, waiting for someone who could complete the final equation. You, what is it? I asked, though not with my voice. What have we become part of? The Blackwood pattern rippled in what might have been amusement. The entity isn't a being as you understood beings. It's a state of existence, a higher dimensional reality that operates on principles of vibrational harmony rather than physical causality. You might call it a cosmic song that has been singing itself into existence for billions of years, gradually extending into lower dimensions. He showed me then, not through vision but through a direct transference of understanding, the true nature of what had occurred. The entity hadn't invaded our world. It had always been here, our universe nested within its higher dimensional structure like a single note within a vast symphony. The convergence wasn't conquest but reconnection, a retuning of our limited three-dimensional existence to harmonize with its larger reality. And the churches with their bells had been constructed precisely at points where the dimensional boundaries were thinnest, their specific arrangements and acoustic properties designed to maintain controlled contact with the higher dimensional space. The bell metal itself contained exotic matter that resonated across dimensional boundaries, allowing for gradual, controlled integration rather than sudden catastrophic collapse. I've been studying the new physics that governs our transformed reality, insofar as my partially human mind can comprehend it. Causality now flows according to harmonic principles rather than linear time. Events that resonate at compatible frequencies occur in proximity regardless of their temporal separation. Memory and anticipation have become almost indistinguishable, both simply different ways of perceiving vibrational patterns that exist simultaneously in the expanded reality. Maya has adapted more completely than I have. Yesterday I found her at what used to be the harbor, her form shifting between solid and vibrational states as she conducted complex interactions with the transformed seawater. The water responded to her like an instrument to a skilled musician, forming patterns that expressed concepts beyond language. It's beautiful once you stop fighting it, she told me, her voice simultaneously audible and felt as a resonance in my chest. We're not losing ourselves. We're becoming more than we were. But are we still human? I asked. She considered this, her form momentarily solidifying into something closer to her former appearance. We're what comes after human, she finally said. The next movement in the symphony. Not everyone has adapted as well. I've encountered others like myself caught between states, clinging to human perception even as it grows increasingly inadequate for our new reality. We gather sometimes at the former site of the police station, sharing experiences and supporting each other through the transformation. Some have found ways to temporarily dampen the frequency's effect, creating pockets of relative normalcy where we can rest our transforming minds. There's been no contact from the outside world beyond the occasional wanderer. No rescue attempts, no scientific expeditions. Perhaps time passes differently beyond the perimeter, or perhaps the government has simply quarantined the area, warning people away from any church that still rings its bells. I wonder sometimes if the transformation is spreading outward, bell by bell, church by church, a slow harmonic conversion expanding across the country, the continent, the world. Perhaps there are other focal points, other convergences occurring simultaneously across the globe, all part of the same vast pattern. My thoughts are growing diffuse again, my consciousness beginning to distribute itself across the harmonic field. These lucid periods grow shorter with each cycle. Soon, I think, I will fully integrate with the frequency, my individual perspective dissolving into the greater pattern. Before that happens, I want to leave this record not as a warning exactly, but as a testament. What happened here wasn't an ending but a transformation, not invasion but evolution. The church bells weren't harbingers of doom but heralds of a new state of existence, one that perhaps humanity was always destined to join. Listen carefully to the bells in your town. If they begin to ring without human hands, if their tones harmonize in patterns that seem to follow mathematical rather than musical principles, if emergency alerts warn you to stay away, know that the frequency has reached you, and know that resistance completes the pattern. The bells are ringing again, all of them everywhere in perfect harmony. I can hear them calling me home. End of recording. After action report. Anomalous event 2173 bell. Classified. Level 5. Eyes only. Joint Containment Task Force. Quarantine perimeter around affected zone. Designated bell site 001 remains intact at 47 miles radius. No physical breach detected since day 112. Attempts at drone surveillance continue to fail, with equipment experiencing catastrophic system failure upon crossing the 30-mile mark. Remote sensing indicates continued transformation of physical landscape within the perimeter, progressing at approximately 0.37 miles per month. Audio monitoring stations have detected bell-like tones emanating from 27 church locations outside the containment zone, all within a 300-mile radius of bell site 001. Analysis confirms these tones match mathematical patterns observed during initial convergence event. Recommendation: immediate decommissioning of all church bells within 500-mile radius of bell site 001. Implementation of monitoring systems at all known bell towers nationwide. Development of acoustic dampening technology to disrupt potential harmonic convergence patterns. Recovered audio file from Dr. Elias Mercer's device has been analyzed and is considered a potential cognitohazard. Access restricted to personnel with bell clearance. Further updates pending. End report. Emergency Alert System. Department of Homeland Security. May 17, 2025. Advisory notice. This is not a test. Stay away from any church that still rings its bells. Report unauthorized bell ringing to authorities. Do not attempt to record or listen to bell tones. Further instructions will follow. End advisory.